Hi everyone, and welcome to the APS Building Safety Act Sessions Q&A. Today I'm joined by Andrew Leslie and Mark Snelling. We're going to go through all the questions that we didn't get a chance to get to during the Building Safety Act sessions. As you can imagine, we're on session 8 at the moment, with 9 and 10 just around the corner, and we have had a bit of a build-up in the last two, especially with the secondary legislation that's come out. Today, I'm going to put some of these questions to Andrew and Mark. We're going to get through as many as possible. Again, if you have any queries, comments, or concerns about the Building Safety Act and any implementations or implications for yourself, please get in contact and we'll try and add them to a future Q&A session. Hello, Andrew. Hello, Mark. So I'm just going to go through the questions now. Question 1. Do you think the construction industry and design teams will fully engage with the new role within BSR as CDM 15 failed to change the thinking towards PD role?
Well, that's a good question. Basically, the new PD role, the new duty holder roles associated with the Building Safety Act are intended to overlay on existing role players, if you like, existing functions within the industry, which in terms of PD is the principal designer and lead designer leading a design team. Organizations that are performing this particular role at the moment have little choice other than to take on board, subject to their circumstances, as discussed in an earlier session, the new PD role if it is offered to them. It's an extension of the lead designer role. That is entirely different to what was on offer in CDM. The definition of designer in CDM is far looser, and it gave the two sets of circumstances. One, designers decided, to some extent, quite a few designers decided not to take on the health and safety role at all, the CDM role. And because of the definitions within CDM of what a designer was and who could become involved in providing principal designer and advisor roles, CDM specialists, if you like, filled that gap. The circumstances are different for the two sets of regulations. So in answer to the question, yes, I think the industry will step up to the plate. I think it's got to if it wants to remain in business.
I think that there's, as with CDM, there is it depends what the building safety regulator, it depends what building control authorities, how they react to the role. And all indications are that they are looking to be quite, trying to pick the right word for it, but that I think they are minded to regulate, and they are minded to enforce relating to this role. They see it, I don't know whether they see it differently, but they see that they need to do something and make sure this works. But time will tell see how they actually react.
Thank you. Question 2. If a significant or relevant refurbishment, i.e. an 18-story tower block with some glazing balcony replacement works, is currently underway on site, what are the likely BSR expectations at project completion, say 12 months or more from now, if any?
If it's on site already, then the transitional arrangements are that it will continue under the existing permissions. What will need to change, I suppose, is that project will be handed over into the occupation regime, or is likely to. I mean, it's almost certain the occupation regime is going to come in, and they will need to make sure that the information they hand over meets the requirements or the needs of the principal accountable person, and I suppose accountable person. So there's a real clear need to plan for handover at as an early stage as you can as possible.
Thank you. Question 3. I'm preparing and amending CDM PCI documentation right now on several projects, and I need to clarify a point made on a previous APS Building Safety Act session webinar number 7. Did I hear it correctly that from 1st of October 23, that all projects shall require a client under the Building Regulations 2023 to appoint a principal designer?
Yeah, Andrew.
Well, I was just going to say, thank you, Mark. Yes, that's an interesting question. The situation is that the transitional arrangements come into play there, and it very much depends on where your project is in terms of submitting full plans or starting on site comes into play. So if you're preparing PCI documentation right now and you're at planning stage, and we're approaching October, it's quite likely that you will not have sufficiently progressed your project by 1st of October, and the full weight of the new regulations will come into play. But we have described the transitional arrangements in the last webinar, webinar 8. And so the point is quite clearly clarified there. If you are talking about appointments and so on, these will come into effect no matter what if you haven't progressed on site after the 4th of April next year, 2024. And so the transitional arrangements are really quite clear. It depends on the progress you're making with your full plans or your dealings with building control. And you must actually have started your construction project on site by the 4th of April next year. If you haven't, then the regulations apply and appointments have to be made.
Thank you ever so much. And that was just a quick shout out as well. If you didn't manage to get to watch the Building Safety Act session number 8, it is currently on the website in the resources section. Question 4 is from someone who's very concerned. So from Concerned Citizen, these updates are causing some alarm right now, as I've also seen a post on LinkedIn this morning, that was the 13th of September, confirming that all projects shall require this appointment of a PD building regs and PC building regs. Any thoughts?
We've been signposting for quite some considerable time now that the biggest changes coming out of the Building Safety Act relate to all works to which the building regulations apply, and that includes the appointment of duty holders, including PDE building regulations, and that for projects that don't meet the transitional arrangements, that they have not started on site by there's been no building control submission or notice of works submitted by the 1st of October this year, that project will come under the new regulations, and there will need to be appointments of principal designer and principal contractor, and all other duty holders will have duties. So it is true. It's the modifications, the amendment regulations amend the building regulations, and there are now duty holder requirements under the building regulations and appointments to be made. And if you haven't got building control approval for your project or submitted a notice by the 1st of October, then all of those requirements come into play.
Thank you. Question 5. My question regarding the Building Safety Act is how does the new Building Safety Act directly and specifically affect the current roles under CDM Regulations 2015 for buildings which are not high risk or high rise category?
Well, as we've said earlier, there are no changes to the CDM regulations, but there are requirements relating to the new regulations and new building regulations that suggest that or require that the CDM principal designer would need to know sufficient about the building regulations in order to liaise with the PD building regulations, whether or not they're within the same organisation or separate organisations?
It's there's always been a requirement for any designer, including a principal designer under the CDM regulations, to been a requirement, been an expectation that they will understand the requirements of relevant building regulations, because clearly the project needs to be delivered against those building regulations. I think the key one is approved document K, or Part K of the building regulations, protection from falling, collision and impact. And I'm looking sideways because I'm reading it off my screen. I think that has always had a crossover, and I would suggest is Part A, structures, and Part B, fire. It's not a detailed knowledge, but to understand the broad requirements so that you can understand that when you are discussing matters relating to, for instance, fire safety, during the construction phase, how things need to be brought online to make sure that those involved in the construction phase are safe. That you understand the ultimate requirements of relating to fire safety. Structure, very similar. And then, of course, you need to understand the environment in which you're working, which is now the new requirements for duty holders and duties of duty holders, because, of course, you will be a designer, and therefore have duties under the building regulations in relation to compliance with the relevant provisions of the building regulations. So you need to understand enough about it to understand how you fit in. And you need, if you don't already know, which you should know, the broad requirements of the key bits of Schedule 1 of the building regulations, probably Part A, Part B, and Part K, then you should have become a study so that you're familiar, if not an expert.
Thank you ever so much, Mark. Little behind the scenes tidbit there. We do have to read off the screen sometimes.
I can remember a lot of things, but not everything.
Yeah, the three of us aren't just oddly darting our eyes around. There's a lot of information here. Okay, question 6. This most likely will be towards Andrew. Will the APS be producing guidance on the new requirements that we PD CDMs can give to PDBR, design teams, clients, and contractors?
Yes, the answer is we will. We already produce briefing notes, and we'll continue to produce new notes and update the existing notes, most of which recently have related to the Building Safety Act and issues around that. In terms of updates for CDM principal designers, yes, I think the answer is that. As I've said before, we're currently working on a competency framework, which will address issues that need to be looked at by both the CDM principal designer and the principal designer under the Building Safety Act. So it's all work in progress at the moment. And basically, we will announce when new bits of information become available on the website and in member bulletins.
There's a practice note covering the building regulations and higher risk building procedures regulations. And that is in the process of being updated. But broadly speaking, what it says, what was proposed and what's in that guidance, it gives a really good flavour of what is now confirmed to be happening. There's not a lot in it in its current format that is actually wrong. But we will, as fast as we possibly can, write. It's a very, very busy time trying to get one's head around all of the new legislation, what it means, and updating courses and writing courses and delivering and producing guidance. It's quite an intense period of time.
But it's fun though, Mark. We're all having fun, and that's what matters.
I love it. I'm sad. I love it.
Question 7. Is a PDBR required where the works are being undertaken on non-HRRBs under a self-certification scheme, such as NFRC, FENSA, NIC, or is it only where a formal building code notice is involved?
This is the one question I looked at and thought that's a really good question. We've had a discussion about it and had a quick look at the regulations and the amendments to regulations, and I think we agree, Andrew, that there is a requirement, but we'll do our best to seek clarification on it. But I think on the face of it, there is nothing saying that isn't the case.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's nothing that links the self-certification schemes with the requirement to appoint a principal designer building regulations that we can see. But as Mark says, we'll double check on that.
Lovely. Question 8. Oof, it's a mouthful. If a scheme with its own single PCI, F10 and CPP, etc., is already running where the works are all self-certified, then can this continue without the need for additional PDBR appointment until the 31st of March? For example, a rolling roofing program that expires on 31st of March, but new roofs are being replaced on a rolling property basis over the project year.
Yes, rolling programs of projects. We had a discussion about this before we began recording. What the questioner needs to do here is look at the transitional provisions and look at Regulation 16. But we think that if you have commenced, if the project construction has commenced before the 4th of April, your project has commenced, and therefore it can continue to its conclusion under the set of rules and regulations that it was commenced under. And if that is before October the 1st, or in terms of lodging full plans, submitting a notice, etc., and if the project construction has started before the 4th of April 2024, then the project, even if it is split up into re-roofing several buildings, one after the other, we think can continue under the rules it was established under.
It's down to that detail. It's down to what was the submission. The submission was for however many roofs. If that project has commenced in accordance with the current set of regulations, and it's down to reading that detail, then if you've complied with that requirement, as Andrew said, I think it continues.
Lovely. That's what I like to hear that. We're all in agreement. Question 9. Much is being placed on competence and the frameworks. As the PDBR role is new, there will be little evidence of this for some time. How are such appointments to be made in the meantime?
The competence requirements are clear in law, and the point of the government commissioning the British standards and the industry work groups that worked on the competency standards and in relationship to the PD and building regulations is PAS 8671. We know what competence looks like. Certainly competence in relation to an individual. But you can read across that standard as it would apply to an organization, because of course you'll need a designated individual to manage that provision, and that's likely to look like a competent individual. And then you'll need to spread about competencies wider across that piece. So we know what it looks like. Now there will be coming online, there are coming online assurance schemes against that standard. And at some point down the line, those assurance schemes, you will be able to become accredited against those schemes, and then that will be your evidence to a client that you've met those requirements. But until that's the case, we know what the legal requirements are. We know what the standards are because the government commissioned 8671, and therefore it would be up to an organisation to put together evidence against that standard, or individuals evidence against that standard to say, I meet that criteria. It's maybe if you read the beginning of 8671, it's not intended for that purpose, but it's clear those are the competency standard. That's what industry got together, and I know because I was on the committee that we got together and said, what does it look like? And we said, it looks like this.
Thank you ever so much. And now for a final question, question 10. Will the APS CDM competence framework be available and so suitably proportionate for individual practitioners that are not part of a larger organisation?
Short answer, yes. It should be relevant to all when it's produced.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Love a short answer to end on. That is our Building Safety Act sessions accompanying Q&A session. Join us for the next one, and thank you ever so much. As always, get your questions to myself, Andrew, or Mark. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.